We declare before the gods and these witnesses our sacred union. We are one people now, united in marriage, united in strength.
Remote Glen Farm voluntarily. We seek Arthur MacLeod, called the leader as they halted before his weather porch. Her English carried no trace of uncertainty. We come to offer marriage. Arthur nearly dropped the rifle he'd instinctively grabbed. 6 women, ranging from barely 20 to perhaps 35, sat their horses with desperate dignity. Their traditional dress was travel-worn, their jewelry hastily gathered, but their eyes burned with fierce determination. "You're making some kind of mistake," Arthur said, backing toward his door. "I don't know you people. You are the man who carved small wooden animals," the leader continued, dismounting with fluid grace. "The man who lost a wife named Isla and 3 children who never drew breath. The man who speaks to grave markers every morning like they might answer." Arthur's blood turned ice water. No living person knew those details. He'd made certain of that through years of careful isolation. The wooden animals, he'd burned them all after Isla died. The graves, he'd marked them with simple stones, no names, no dates. And his morning conversations with the dead were conducted in whispers that couldn't carry beyond his own ears. "How could you possibly?" he began, but stopped when the woman reached into her leather pouch and withdrew something that made his knees buckle. A small wooden rabbit, no bigger than his thumb, carved with the same careful hands that crafted dozens of similar toys during Isla's difficult pregnancies. He had burned every piece he'd made, watching them turn to ashes as fever consumed his wife. Yet here one sat, impossible as snow in summer, in the palm of a stranger. "Where did you find that?" His voice cracked from disuse and shock. "From a medicine woman who tended your wife," the Highland woman replied. "Old Myrie kept this hidden for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to return it. She died 4 days ago, but not before telling us where to find the gray-eyed shepherd who carved hope into wood." Arthur staggered against his doorframe. Old Myrie. He'd forgotten that name, pushed it from memory along with everything else from those terrible months. But he remembered now, the old Highland woman who had come when no town doctor would travel so far for so little payment. The one who had brought herbs and knowledge, who had tried desperately to save Isla and the babies when conventional medicine failed. "Old Myrie said you would help us," the woman continued, "because you understand what it means to lose everything to circumstances beyond your control." Arthur looked at each woman carefully for the first time. Beneath the ritual face paint, he saw exhaustion mixed with unwavering resolve. These weren't fortune seekers or confidence tricksters. They were refugees fleeing something terrible enough to drive them to this desperate gambit. "I'm Elspeth," the leader said, introducing herself with formal gravity. "These are my companions, Myrie, Catriona, Fiona, Eilid, and Saleus. We were promised to men we could not accept. When we refused, our families declared us dead." She gestured to the blue woad marking their faces. "This paint marks our death to our people. We cannot return. We cannot survive alone in these territories." One of the younger women, barely out of girlhood, stepped forward. "I am Eilid. The man chosen for me has buried 4 wives already. Each died in childbirth or from his fists. I would rather face death than guarantee it." Arthur studied their faces, seeing desperation tempered by dignity. Whatever drove them to his door had been worse than exile. Worse than seeking marriage with a complete stranger. "Why marriage?" he asked. "Why not just hide until the danger passes?" "Because territorial law recognizes marriages between Highland women and local settlers," Elspeth explained. "Once we are legally your wives, taking us becomes an act of war between clans. Our families cannot touch us without risking larger conflict." The irony struck Arthur like a physical blow. Laws designed to prevent conflicts over stolen women would now protect women from their own people. "And what happens after?" he asked. 6 wives sharing 1 small cabin, 1 piece of land. "Highland women know cooperation," said the one called Myrie, her scarred hands speaking of hard work and harder choices. "We build our own shelter, grow our own food, contribute our own skills. We ask only for protection under your name and the right to remain on your land." Before Arthur could respond, Elspeth pointed toward the distant mountains where dust clouds marked approaching riders. "Our family sent warriors to retrieve us. They will arrive before sunset." Arthur shaded his eyes, counting the figures. 10 riders, moving with military precision. "Are men who wouldn't be interested in negotiation. If they find us unmarried, they will drag us back to face punishment for our rebellion," Elspeth continued. "But if we belong to a settler under territorial law, they cannot touch us without risking war." "And if I refuse?" Arthur asked, though the shepherd's shoulders already told him the answer. Elspeth's hand moved to the knife at her belt. "Then we make our stand here and die on your land rather than live as slaves. Either way, we do not return." The dust clouds grew larger, individual horses becoming visible against the orange sky. Arthur calculated time and distance. 20 minutes, perhaps 30 before pursuit arrived. "There's no preacher," Arthur said, grasping for practical objections to an impossible situation. No legal witnesses. Territorial law allows emergency declarations of marriage, Elspeth replied, witnessed by the involved parties and recorded later. We need only your spoken agreement before they arrive. Arthur looked at the 6 women, really seeing them for the first time. Beneath their desperation, he recognized something that made his chest tighten with painful memory. They stood just like Isla used to stand when facing impossible choices. Back straight, chins raised, ready to bear whatever weight the world demanded. The approaching riders were close enough now that individual voices carried on the wind. Angry voices speaking in rapid Gaelic about shame and duty and the necessity of bringing the women home. What are your names again? Arthur asked quietly. Each woman stepped forward in turn. Elspeth, Myri, Catriona, Fiona, Eilid, Sileus. Their names fell like stones into still water, each creating ripples that would reshape everything that followed. Arthur thought of the 15 years he'd spent talking to gravestones, carving animals he would never give away, living like a man already dead. These women offered him something he'd forgotten existed, a reason to face tomorrow. The lead rider reached the edge of his property, close enough for Arthur to see war paint streaked across young features twisted by rage. The warrior raised his rifle, not quite aiming but making his intentions unmistakably clear. I, Arthur MacLeod, take you as my wives under territorial law, Arthur declared, his voice growing stronger with each word. I pledge to protect and provide for you, to stand with you against all who would do you harm. The women spoke in unison, their voices carrying across the yard like a battle cry. We accept your protection, and offer ours in return. The young warrior who had led the pursuit dismounted at the edge of the yard, his rifle trained on Arthur. Settler, he shouted in heavily accented English. You harbor our women. Return them, or face the consequences. Arthur stepped forward, placing himself between the warriors and his new wives. For the first time in 15 years, he felt like the man Isla had married, someone willing to fight for what mattered. These women are my wives under territorial law, Arthur called back. They are under my protection now. The warrior's face darkened with fury. He spoke rapidly to his companions in Gaelic, and Arthur saw hands moving toward weapons. But then something unexpected happened. The warrior's eyes fixed on the silver pendant at Elspeth's throat, and his expression shifted from rage to something approaching awe. That belongs to old Myri, the young man said, his voice losing its commanding edge. She was medicine woman to our people. She died 4 seasons ago. Elspeth's hand moved protectively to the necklace. She gave it to us. Said it would guide us to safety. The warrior studied Arthur with new attention. Old Myri spoke of a white woman who died bringing 4 children. Said this woman's spirit was restless, that she had unfinished work. He paused. You are the husband, she mentioned. Arthur felt understanding dawn with devastating clarity. Old Myri knew Isla. She tried to save her. Old Myri carried guilt for 15 winters, the warrior explained. Said she failed to save your woman and children. She told us these women would come to you because you would understand their need. Behind the warrior, an older man with ritual scars across his weathered face spoke sharply in Gaelic. The young leader responded with equal force, and Arthur caught enough words to understand they were arguing about whether to honor a dead medicine woman's wishes or enforce tribal law. My uncle says old Myri was old and confused, the warrior translated. He says these women belong to their families, not to dead medicine women or settlers. His hand tightened on his rifle. He wants to settle this matter with blood. Arthur stepped closer to the mounted warriors. Then he'll have to kill me first. These women asked for my protection and I gave my word. The scarred uncle raised his weapon, but the young warrior grabbed the barrel and forced it down. They argued in rapid Gaelic, voices rising with each exchange. They debate whether old Mary's final wish carries more weight than tribal custom, Elspeth translated quietly. The young one is her grandson. He believes we should be allowed to choose our path. The argument intensified, the uncle's voice growing more aggressive. But then, the young warrior did something that surprised everyone. He dismounted and walked toward the stone markers that indicated Isla's grave. The warrior knelt beside the simple grave and placed his hand on the weathered stone. When he looked up, his eyes reflected deep emotion. Old Myri came here every month for 15 years, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. She brought flowers, cleaned the stones, spoke to the dead woman in both languages. He stood slowly. She said this woman died trying to give life, and that made her sacred to our people. Arthur felt his throat close with emotion. All those times he'd found fresh wildflowers on Isla's grave, assuming they'd blown there by chance. All those mornings when the stone seemed cleaner than he'd left it. A Highland medicine woman had been honoring his wife's memory while he wallowed in guilt. Old Myri said she learned much from watching your woman fight for her unborn children, the warrior continued. Said it taught her that some spirits burn too bright to be contained by one lifetime of sorrow. The scarred uncle spat on the ground and spoke harshly. But the young warrior responded with calm authority that silenced the older man. "My uncle says the dead are dead and should not concern the living," the warrior translated. "But I am war chief now, and old Mairi's wisdom guided our people for 60 winters. Her final wishes will be honored." He turned to address his companions in Gaelic, with a voice that brooked no argument. One by one, the other warriors lowered their weapons. The uncle wheeled his horse around and rode away without another word. 2 others following. The remaining warriors stayed with their leader. "What happens now?" Arthur asked. "Now you learn what it means to have 6 Highland wives," the war chief said with the first smile Arthur had seen from him. "They will work you harder than any city woman ever could." Behind Arthur, Mairi laughed softly. "He speaks truth. We are not gentle wives who sit quietly by the fire." The war chief gathered his reins. "I am Hamish Crowfeather. I will send word to territorial officials about these marriages, making them legal in both our laws." He paused, looking once more at Isla's grave. Old Mairi said the white woman's spirit would rest easier, knowing her husband was no longer alone. As the warriors departed, Arthur found himself standing in his yard with 6 women who were now legally his wives, wondering how his solitary existence had transformed so completely in the span of a single afternoon. The silence following the rider's departure felt heavier than the years of solitude Arthur had grown accustomed to. 6 women stood in his yard, their few possessions still secured to their horses, studying the small cabin that had housed only one man for 15 years. "We cannot all shelter there," Elspeth said practically. "We will need additional buildings before winter." Arthur nodded, grateful for her directness. "There's lumber in the barn. Tools, too. The land is suitable for construction." He paused, still adjusting to the reality of addressing his wives. "Do you know building techniques?" Fiona, who had remained quiet during the confrontation, smiled for the first time since their arrival. "Highland women learn skills your city women do not. We can build, hunt, preserve food, tend livestock. We are not ornaments." Over the following hours, Arthur watched in amazement as the women transformed his property with efficient organization. They assessed every resource, planned living arrangements, and began preparing for permanent settlement. Catriona and Highland examined his vegetable garden with knowing eyes, discussing improvements in rapid Gaelic. Mairi and Sileus evaluated his small sheep herd, pointing out animals needing attention. "Your ram is past his prime," Mairi informed him bluntly. "He cannot properly service all the ewes. You need younger breeding stock." Arthur found himself laughing. Actually laughing. "For the first time in years, you've been here 4 hours, and you're already rebuilding my entire farm." "That is what wives do," Elspeth said matter-of-factly. "We improve life, not merely maintain it." As evening approached, practical questions became more personal. They gathered around the fire pit the women had enhanced with stones from the creek, sharing a meal somehow prepared from his meager supplies. "How does this arrangement function?" Arthur asked finally. 6 wives, 1 husband. I don't understand the expectations." The women exchanged glances before Catriona spoke. "We are not 6 separate wives competing for your attention. We are one family with different strengths. Some of us may bear children if we choose," Elspeth added. "Others will focus on different contributions. We share duties, responsibilities, and the burden of survival. Highland women understand that cooperation strengthens families more than competition," Fiona continued. Arthur studied the faces illuminated by firelight. Each woman was distinct. Elspeth's natural leadership, Catriona's quiet wisdom, Mairi's practical knowledge, Fiona's gentle strength, Islad's fierce independence, and Sileus's quick intelligence. Together, they formed something he hadn't experienced since childhood, a genuine family. "What about affection?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Finally, Elspeth answered with characteristic honesty. "Love develops in many forms. We do not expect you to care for us all equally or identically. But we offer respect, partnership, and the opportunity to build something meaningful together." She paused, her eyes reflecting the flames. After 15 years of grieving, perhaps that provides sufficient foundation. As the women settled into the cabin for their first night, arranging sleeping spaces with quiet efficiency, Arthur found himself looking toward Isla's grave. For the first time since her death, he felt something other than guilt when thinking of her. 6 months later, Arthur stood in the doorway of the main cabin, observing his wives working in the expanded garden that now fed 13 people comfortably. The property had been transformed beyond recognition. 4 additional structures housed different aspects of their shared life: sleeping quarters, workshop space, storage for their increased livestock, and a communal kitchen. Elspeth approached, her belly rounded with the child she carried, the first of what would likely be many. She had chosen motherhood, while Fiona and Sileus focused on crafts they sold in the territorial capital, and Myri managed their growing herd with skills that made neighboring farmers envious. Hamish Crowfeather visits today, Elspeth informed him. He brings news from the territorial office. The war chief had become a regular visitor, bridging the gap between their unusual family and both local and Highland communities. His presence legitimized their arrangement and helped others understand that this union served everyone's interests. When Hamish arrived, he carried official documents that made Arthur smile genuinely. "The territorial governor has recognized your marriages as legal precedent," Hamish announced. "Other Highland women facing similar circumstances now have this option." Arthur nodded, understanding the broader significance. Their personal solution had become a pathway for others, caught between changing worlds. "How do your neighbors accept this arrangement?" Hamish asked, gesturing toward the bustling property. "Better than anticipated," Arthur replied honestly. "The farm produces more food than ever before. We trade fairly with everyone. Results speak louder than unusual circumstances." That evening, following their established custom, the family gathered at Isla's grave for their evening meal. The women had embraced this ritual, understanding that honoring Arthur's first wife honored the foundation of their current happiness. Arthur placed fresh flowers on the stone marker, flowers grown in the garden his Highland wives had expanded. "Isla," he said softly, "old Myri was correct. You would have appreciated them. They work as diligently as you did. Fight for what matters as fiercely as you fought." Catriona, now visibly pregnant with her first child, smiled at him. "She would be proud of the man you have become again." And it was true. The hollow, guilt-ridden hermit who had lived alone for 15 years was gone. In his place stood a man with purpose, responsibility, and hope for the future. 6 women had asked him to marry them all, and in accepting, he had discovered not just companionship but resurrection. The farm thrived under multiple capable hands. Children would soon play in yards where silence had reigned for years. The sound of conversation and laughter echoed off buildings that had known only solitude. Arthur looked around at his expanded family, wives, expected children, and the community they had built together, and realized that sometimes the most impossible requests lead to the most extraordinary transformations. The old shepherd who had lived alone was gone forever, replaced by a man surrounded by life, purpose, and love in forms he never could have imagined. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Arthur MacLeod knew with absolute certainty that he had found his way home. The most unlikely salvation had arrived at his door in the form of 6 desperate women who had somehow known exactly what both they and he needed to survive and thrive in an unforgiving world. If you enjoyed this story of survival and second chances, please remember to share, like, and subscribe for more epic tales.
If this one made you feel something, that's not by accident.